mean, I don't think what I believe really matters. If there's one thing I've found out in all my life experience, that mostly things just happen or they don't.
Well, we are live. This is Constructor Criticism. I'm Spencer, host of Constructor Criticism, joined by my co-host, Michael. How's it going, Michael?
It's good, but
You locked silver!
Yeah. No, I'm happy.
Technically.
I'm happy. Yeah. No, I mean, I mostly locked it before, but
But now you're actually a silver pro.
If my plane won't take off or whatever. Yeah, I got the email today, actually, saying congratulations and hooking me up with, sweet QPs that I definitely don't need.
I already had 58 QPs I wasn't going to use.
More like 158, but yeah.
You're a degenerate.
What can I say?
Well, welcome to Constructor Criticism. We're so excited to be back. Sorry we're a day late. We both were coming back from Vegas, but we're excited for this week's episode. So this week, we're going to do standard in a way that we've never done it before, which is exciting. And we're going to talk about understanding flex spots in decks that you play. So both pretty exciting topics, and we'll get right into this. So don't forget to check out our sponsors at both Oasis Games and the Mana Base. Oasis Games is an amazing place to buy Magic cards. I spent the entire weekend with the owner. We got to talk a lot about his store, his vision, what he wants to do in the future, where he sees his store going. And honestly, there's not a person that you should support more in this world than Alex Sittner. He's just a kind human being that loves Magic players and wants to help everybody improve. That's why he sponsors this podcast. And we really appreciate him and his store. So check out Oasis Games at oasisgamesllc.com. You can get 15% off of your first order using the code CCMTG at checkout. That's 15% off of a huge chunk of change if you go out and buy an entire deck. You can also get 4% off of every order by using the code Would That Be Good. That's Would That Be Good, no spaces, and it would be good. It brings you really close. We got a Facebook comment that was like, hey guys, I noticed that some of the cards were actually a little bit more expensive than TCG Player. Is there a reason for this? And I kind of let them know. I said, the cards are going to be close to that price. They are going to be more expensive than TCG, but when you use that code, that 4% code, it should be really, really close. But honestly, they're going to have everything in stock in one location rather than having to order from a bunch of locations like you do off of TCG Player.
Yeah, I think that's true. It also it's just going to depend card to card. Sometimes prices are, as with literally every store. Yep.
It matters what's in stock, right? It's a supply and demand thing that they have built in. So you can also check out our other sponsor at the Mana Base. There's tons of awesome, great Magic content on there. We really appreciate their sponsorship, and we're excited. They were excited for us this weekend when Danny top-aided the GP, and I think that this can be a good relationship. And so if you're looking for some awesome Magic content, go to the Mana Base and check out their sponsors. So they have Fusion Gaming as one of their sponsors that sells sealed products, something that Oasis Games doesn't offer. So if you're looking for booster boxes of the upcoming set and you're not in Salt Lake, then that is a great place to go and acquire them. So check them out at the Mana Base. So, all right, let's get right into this. So every week on the show, we invite listeners of the show who are patrons. So you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg to support the show. And if you do, you actually get to ask a question on the show. And this week we have a question from one of our listeners, Tony. We want to go ahead and read that, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Spencer and Michael. I just wanted to start by saying how much I love the show. In my time being a patron and interacting with you, I have really seen an increase in my number of wins. I am, however, struggling with one aspect of Magic. I consistently find I am not doing as well as my peers, who I feel like I am better than. I consistently beat them in playtesting, and they often come to me for advice, but I can't seem to close out PPTQs or game days like they do. How do I fix this, or is it even a problem to begin with? Thanks for the great content, and congrats on Silver, Michael. Tony. And I promise I didn't add the last sentence, but
he didn't. It's there. Michael, you want to go first on this one?
This is kind of a tricky one. I guess ultimately, I feel like this sort of ties back into what we were talking about a couple of episodes ago with kind of working at your own pace, and I think just trying to put the focus on playing good Magic and trying to improve yourself rather than comparing your results to those around you is probably the best way to not only get better, but to be happy in your journey of doing so. Like, I think if you expect, to day two every GP that all of your friends day two, or you expect to, win an FNM every time they win an FNM, like it creates kind of a weird and unhealthy sense of competition in that you're not worried about controlling the things you can control. And instead you're almost rooting against the people around you.
Yeah, and that's something that we've had friends of ours in the past. Before Michael joined, it was actually some people that we tested with often were rooting against us, and it was really awkward. And I think that it's important to know there's like swings in Magic, and every tournament is an individual event with its own variants, with its own things that happen. So I mean, it's you can look at all kinds of things. So for example, I didn't day two the modern GP this time around. I played every round. I didn't make day two. All my friends did. I'm not down on myself. It's just one GP. Michael, he went to Portland with us for that standard GP. He didn't day two. A bunch of us did.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even get sort of close. Like I mostly got wrecked. And
sure. But what I'm saying is
right.
Like every event is going to be different. And I know that here you're talking about like PPTQs and game days, and like I didn't win a game day at my last game day. I played in 2 game days and didn't win one. Sometimes you're just not going to win a game day, man. Like, I think we actually talked about this when this happened. Like, you can't take an individual tournament and base everything that you've done around that one event. That's not how Magic works. And when you do that, you're going to be really frustrated. What you can do, however, that might actually make you feel better is when your friends succeed and you were a part of that, you were testing with them, you were helping them with their deck list, you were talking to them about Magic, you were playtesting, you're a part of that success. It doesn't feel like it because Magic is mostly a solo game, individualized. But like when Danny top 8'd this weekend, I felt really good. Like,
it was awesome, wasn't it?
It was just a great feeling. Like this guy that I play Magic with, that I talk about Magic with every week on a podcast, that I like test for every Pro Tour with. Yeah, I felt really good when he top 8'd his first GP, and I felt awesome. I was excited. And that's how you need to feel for those friends that you're playtesting with. Because if you're rooting against them, then, like, what's the point? Like, Magic is hard enough on its own. You don't need to, like, add extra problems into that.
Yeah, like, watching Danny get that. We had been talking about the Delver Sneak and Show matchup the night before, and in his last round in Game 3, he made just a brilliant play and baited his opponent into just blowing a daze on nothing. And like just watching him make that play, it was like we were just like fist pumping because we knew that was the end of the game.
And it was a play that you had
talked
awesome. About with him.
Well, and that like we just knowing that like we're all trying to get better together and watching him make that play, which was so good. It was just really sweet. And I think that in general, like one of the fun things about having friends who play Magic is that you get other people to root for and cheer for and be excited for. And I think that if you feel like you're having a problem, closing PPTQs or stuff like that, that is maybe a separate issue, but I would want to address that a little bit separately from, kind of building resentment towards your friends when they do well.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty easy to like. I remember, I think I've told this on the podcast before, but there was a time in the old PTQ system where there were people winning PTQs when I wasn't, that I knew unequivocally were worse than Magic than I was. And it wasn't like people would tell me, like, can you believe this guy won a PTQ? He's so much worse at Magic than you. And I was like, no, I can't. But I wasn't actually that good at Magic back then. I didn't realize that, like, it's just not how Magic works. If the best player in the room won every PTQ, I wouldn't win very many PTQs.
I would win. We'd have a collective 0, right? I mean, you go to a Pro Tour and you just get crushed by the same people every time you go to a GP, and you'd look at the top tables and it'd be like, it's just how the game works.
Yeah. So
When it comes to closing, I guess I would look at like focusing more on, is there something consistently going wrong for you at the end of these events, or do you, because I mean, it's likely that unless you're playing a ton of these, your sample size probably isn't really that big. So it's entirely possible that if you lose in two PPTQ finals or whatever, it doesn't really mean anything outside of the fact that you lost two matches of Magic you would rather have won.
I like the way you
But
said that.
right, I mean, you'd rather win them, but like, what are you gonna do about it? It's just a small sample. If it's getting to the point where it's like starting to be a pretty big sample, or you notice yourself playing badly, I mean, I would examine those in the same way you'd examine anything else you're frustrated with in Magic. I would mostly just caution you to be happy that your friends are having success. That, I think, can be really unhealthy if you let it be.
Yeah. Let's move on from this. Thank you so much for the question, Tony. We really appreciate it. I hope that that you can find enjoyment in rooting for your friends in Magic, because there's a lot of my enjoyment in Magic comes from that, and it makes Magic more worthwhile. So don't worry that you can ask these kind of questions by becoming a patron. If you become one of our constructor critics, meaning you donate $10 or more per month, you get all kinds of benefits.
5, correct?
Oh, it is 5. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's 5. I hope it's 5.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you didn't $5 or more per month, you get access to our constructor critics groups, which has access to our deck lists, our Pro Tour testing, and just like in-depth conversations with other people who are trying to improve in a way that you are, as they're also donating that money. But if you can just donate anything, we are really moving up in these donations, and we're hoping to turn that into a few different things for the show and for us as Magic players. So if starting at $1 or more per month, anything you see fit, if you just go to constructedcriticism.com, you can click. There's a button down there that has all kinds of ways to support the show. There's the Patreon. There's Swag Store. There's just PayPal. But anything that you see fit is really appreciated, and we really appreciate it. Let's talk about our next segment, which is #always improving. We believe if you're not getting better, you're getting worse, and we want to be doing what we can every week to be trying to improve at Magic. Michael, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Well, in terms of playing Magic, I don't really have a whole lot to play right now. I mean, kind of in a little break in between these Grand Prix and really having enough like spoiler information to start working on limited or constructed for the Pro Tour. But I don't know. I guess always improving one, kind of looping back to the patron question. I was just so happy for both Alex and Danny.
Oh man, what a great weekend!
I wasn't, it's always interesting to see people around you really do well, and I wasn't sure exactly how I'd feel, but it was just awesome. I had a really great weekend. I got to watch a bunch of my friends do really well. I got to see two of my friends now are going to be able to go to Kyoto with me. I'm really excited, and it was just it's not really an always improving moment, but I still feel kind of like contact high from just from this weekend.
I think that there are a few things that happened, right? Like there was Alex played specific cards in his decks because of you this weekend, in the form of the Grove of the Burnwillows. Danny and you talked about a matchup that ended up being a pivotal matchup that, I think that it's important to note that you're not playing those matches for your friends, but things that you say impact people. And when you surround yourself with other people that play Magic, that's going to be matches of Magic. And I think that you had an impact on both of them, and I think that they would both say it. And I think that you were really helpful. And now there are 3 of you silver on our team, and that's awesome.
It felt really awesome. I was just so happy for both of them because I know that they both try so hard, and it's so difficult to, having just gotten silver myself. I know that is really a grind. I was just so happy that they both got there.
Yeah.
So it was really awesome.
Congratulations to them. It's super awesome to see. Uh, Speaking of which, my improving moment is a little bit different. So, okay, so I try to get a lot of playtesting in for this GP. Try being the keyword. I actually didn't get very much playtesting in for this GP. There were not people available to playtest with me during the times that I could playtest. I didn't feel confident going into either of the GPs that I played in, and I realized that a lot of the time that I've been dedicated to Magic has been to my Magic content, and not a lot of my time has been to understanding matchups and improving and stuff like that. It's been about improving my shows, and I still want to do that, but there are segments of my day that I technically have dedicated to Magic that I just don't do anything with. And I, I want to get better at this game all the time. And there's a line in the Netflix documentary from Magic the Gathering where Reed Duke says that he made a decision not to be a local grinder. Like, that's not what he wanted to be. He wanted to be like one of the great Magic players. And honestly, I don't want to be a local grinder either. I have no aspirations of winning PPTQs and going to every RPTQ. That's just not an aspiration I have. My aspiration is like going to the Pro Tour and competing at the Pro Tour. And being a dad and preparing to be a dad has taken a lot of time out of my life that I used to dedicate to Magic. And now I'm not going to give up on my son. I'm not just going to stop being a dad. That's not going to happen. But I am going to work to prioritize my life a little bit. Because when I watch my friends do well at tournaments, I'm very happy. It makes me very happy to see that. But I also want to experience it. It also doesn't help that this is the first GP I haven't day 2'd in like a couple years. Not that I played in very many GPs, I haven't. But it was a frustrating experience not to day 2 a GP when I wanted to. So I think that for me, it's like realizing a few things. One of the things that I realized is that I was playing a lot on autopilot. So there were a lot of times where I was playing Magic, making plays, and not really thinking about my other lines available to me. I just did the first thing that came to my mind, which is like a really bad way to play Magic. And it's something that I really need to really notice that I need to work on as the day progressed. It happened a few times in a few rounds. And the worst part is that I was also winning some of my matches where it was happening, which actually caused me to get really frustrated. There is a real frustration that I have in winning games that I don't deserve to, and especially like when I'm getting unlucky in the games that I'm losing. So like I was winning games that I had no right winning, and then losing games when I got extremely unlucky. And I was like, why can't I just swap these? Why can't I just get lucky when I'm playing? Get lucky when I'm playing well. And the thing is that like it is completely my fault for the amount of preparation I put into these tournaments, and also the amount of dedication that I had to the tournaments. I picked a deck that was like, well, I know how to play this deck for Modern, so I'm going to play this. I was told that we actually had the Legacy deck I wanted to be playing at the store the day before the GP, even though I had already borrowed a deck from a listener. I was like, I've already borrowed a deck. I'm not worried about it. And then I got to the tournament, and I was playing the deck, and I was like, man, I actually really wish that I was playing that other deck. And then, like, I ended up dropping from the tournament still in contention for day 2 because I didn't want to be playing the deck I was playing. Not that I'm not happy that the listener loaned me the deck. I'm very happy. Like, it made my trip, and I got to play Legacy, which I really enjoyed. But, like, I was frustrated with myself the entire time thinking, like, man, I really wish that I had been playing this other deck that I was told I could play and I didn't because I was lazy and not dedicated. All of this is a long-winded way of saying that I am going to work really hard to qualify for one of the first 2 Pro Tours, and if I do that, I plan on chasing silver next year if that happens. And it's something that I've never, even after, I mean, Michael, you were there when after my first Pro Tour, it was like, I didn't know what to do next. And after seeing all you guys qualify for silver, it's like, okay, well, I guess that's the next thing that I should be trying to do. It's just very dependent on those first 2 Pro Tours. So yeah,
it's probably tough without playing. You
probably
need to play 2 Pro Tours
at least
in a season.
And
2
and
would be
very likely that one of them one of them has to be the first 2.
I mean, I think it could be the 3rd and 4th. It's obviously just going to be tighter then. But
right, but the here's
it frees you up to devote more time to it, basically.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. It was to say, like, my dedication has to be put in certain places as a father, and so like.
Right. If things aren't going well, then
yeah,
it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to keep dumping a bunch of your time into it.
Yeah. So let's be clear. My goal is not to get silver next year, but my goal is to qualify for one of the first 2 Pro Tours, and play in more GPs. I already have a few GPs that I'm looking at going to, depending on how I do at those, like, and other things. Like, I'll probably fly to more with Michael and just kind of see where that takes me. But other than that, it's a real dedication to understanding matchups, dedicating time to actually playing Magic, and following through. It's one thing to like talk about Magic every week, play Magic every week, look at decks every week, but like I used to put in 30 hours of Magic playing a week, and right now, outside of if I eliminate PPTQs, it's probably under 10 hours right now. And so I would like to get, including PPTQs and other tournaments, I'd like to get closer to 20 again, like a part-time job. So
yeah, I think being realistic about where your priorities need to be and just making sure that the time that you are allocating is like being spent in the best way it can. I think that's a lot of it for most people. Like, even if you don't have that much time, if the time that you do have is spent in the right places, you can get a lot out of it.
Yeah. And I just,
because I mean, I play a ton of Magic, but I certainly just play to play sometimes. And I mean,
sure.
I think I could probably, play significantly less than I do and get about similar to what I really get out of the Magic that I play.
Yeah, and I think that it's like kind of allocating your time correctly. So, for example, before this podcast, the first thing that something that I was doing is like, someone was like, "Hey, I'm available to test." So I was like, "Cool, can we play sideboard games of this matchup?" Like, I need to know this specific thing, and that's just not something that I was doing a week ago.
I think just sometimes knowing what information is important to you, like, if you already know some information and you know that you know it, but you also know what you don't know, then you can just spend your time gathering data more efficiently, right? And that's really the main goal, right? You might not need to play a huge amount of pre-sideboarded games because you've played, very similar matchups to this before. You basically know how things are going to play out, right?
Yeah.
And I think just being cognizant of that when you go into, breaking down how you want to spend your time can really make a big difference in allowing you to play enough Magic to improve without it, taking up 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week even.
Yeah. So that's it for me. It was interesting, to say the least, in watching myself. I felt there were so many times where I felt like I was watching myself like, making mistakes, and it was like, why did I do that? Like, I didn't even think about that line. And so I just don't want to have those feelings as often anymore. And I want to get back to the kind of Magic that I was playing not too long ago. But man, like, the rust is real when you don't play a ton of Magic. And the other thing is like, I've kind of skated by. So something that we've done for a few GPs that I've gone to is like intense limited preparation or constructed preparation of that format, like we were testing for a Pro Tour before GPs, and that's really been helpful for me. But like, I don't think it's realistic to do that for every GP I go to, and so I kind of have to spread out that time a little bit, and that's kind of what my plan is. So
yeah, I have a couple of ideas as far as sort of making preparation more efficient that I'm interested to try out. But
awesome. I'm happy to hear them.
But I think that a lot of the time that stuff is hard to get dialed in.
Yeah, I think.
And
so
I think
too.
that's a reason why familiarity is so big. Like, if you don't have access to information from really good players, I think just knowing how to play whatever deck it is that you're choosing to play, I think there's a reason that has worked well for, people who aren't big names, especially in Modern, where the card pool is so deep.
Should we go on to our next segment?
Absolutely.
So our next segment is our deck doctor. So everybody on the show, if you are a constructor critic, meaning you donate $5 or more per month, you can submit a deck to us for us to talk about on the show. We talk about what we love, what we would change, and where we think the deck stands. All right, Michael, you pick. We can do Mason's deck of black-white anointed cats, or Oliver's deck of Jund Energy. I'm being told by Mason that we have to do Jund Energy.
Well, that's good to know.
All right.
That makes the decision so much easier.
Let's pull this deck up really quick. Why don't you go ahead and read it for us, Michael?
All right. Well, I'm reading it from the picture, so this might be interesting. 4 Aether Hub, 4 Blooming Marsh, 4 Forest, 1 Swamp, 3 Mountain, 1 Canyon Slough, 4 Game Trail, 4 Attune with Aether, 4 Fatal Push, 1 Cut to Ribbons, 3 Unlicensed Disintegration, 3 Heart of Kirin, 1 Sky Sovereign Console Flagship, 4 Greenbelt Rampager, 4 Scrap Heap Scrounger, 4 Voltaic Brawler, 2 Rishkar Pima Renegade, 2 Ronus the Indomitable, 2 Hazoret the Fervent, and 2 Glorybringer. And then the sideboard is 2 Magma Spray, 2 Tireless Tracker, 3 Transgress the Mind, 1 Unlicensed Disintegration, 3 Radiant Flames, 1 Chandra Torch of Defiance, 2 Never to Return, and 1 Sky Sovereign Console Flagship.
So I actually have an upfront question, as this is a deck that I was actually brewing early on in the format during the Pro Tour season. Why are these decks playing Hazoret? Because this is not the first one that I've seen doing it, and I actually don't understand.
I am not sure. I'm a little scared of playing the and this deck also has 3 Bristling Hydras that I missed because I'm reading from a picture. But I'm a little scared of playing the Hazoret Sky Sovereign Glorybringer deck.
Yeah.
Like,
so here's the thing, is I like the idea of this deck. I like Cut to Ribbons, I like Glorybringer, I like Ronus, I like the things this deck is trying to do. I do not understand why almost all of these decks universally that I see like this are playing Hazoret, though. I actually don't get it.
I think Hazoret is like pretty good with Ronus specifically. But my bigger issue in this deck, so if you don't draw Heart of Kirin, we actually don't have like any 4-power creatures besides Hazoret and Glorybringer. So I worry about Ronus a little bit in this deck, like either being super mana intensive or just not being able to get fired up all that easily. I mean, I guess Rishkar can make one of your other guys work that way. It's interesting. I haven't played a lot of this style. I get the appeal of Unlicensed. I get the appeal of playing like Heart of Kirin, but when I look at this deck, I feel like we're somewhere between Mardu and Green Black, and I'm not sure. Well, I mean, but it's kind of like if you mash together Mardu and Green Black counters, right? You kind of end up here, and I'm not really 100% sure why. Like, what card is it specifically you think that like draws you to this strategy?
I'm not too worried about the Ronus thing because I think Ronus fixes that problem all by herself. And I've played a lot of Ronus so far. It's like one of my favorite cards from the new set. And I'm not really worried about not being able to get to 4 power because I just put it on. I just pump that into my Scrap Heap Scrounger. What are they going to do? Kill my Scrap Heap Scrounger? Like, okay. Like, cool.
Yeah, well, but in terms of tempo, that can actually be pretty big. Like if you get Fatal Pushed at that point, right?
But the thing is like against those decks that are tempo decks, like, I'm going to play this Ronus, right? I'm going to attack with whatever creature I haven't played before that. And then, I'm on 4 mana, so I've got Bristling Hydra as a draw. I have tons of things I can be doing with my mana. I can leave up Fatal Push plus activate Ronus anyway to be even more tempo positive. So, like, there's ways to make up with it between cheap stuff like Murderous Cut and things like that. The one thing that I don't understand is, like, how Hazoret fits into that. Now, if the idea is, like, you go, that's the thing. It's like even the 1-drops in this deck don't do anything.
Well, it's more that the 1-drops in this deck don't actually get out of your hand.
So
right. That makes
that's
me
what I
nervous
meant.
about.
That's what I meant to say.
Right, like Greenbelt Rampager can sometimes get out of your hand, but it's not guaranteed. Attune with Aether is like replacing itself unless you're just failing to find, which seems kind of bad.
By the way, it's not just Oliver who has this in his deck. A lot of these guys have Hazoret in their Jund decks, and the thing to me is when I've tested this deck, I wanted something like Channeler Initiate a lot, so I can like go early into like Bristling Hydra and then follow it up with a Ronis plus other things to like
or maybe a Servant of the Conduit.
Either way,
but some kind of mana dork. I kind of agree. I've had that feeling testing some of the Temur Energy decks as well. That I really want a lot of mana dorks, and I think that like playing a bunch of like playing actually like Bristling Hydras and Glorybringers, those cards are so much better when they're accelerated out.
Yes.
And I wonder about leaning on mana dorks a little bit too. The difference is that when you're playing Heart of Kirin, you're sort of incentivized to keep all of your creatures at least 3 power. So there's a real tension there, and I'm not quite sure the direction that I want to go. Right? I mean, if you're going to play Heart of Kirin, I don't know that you can actually play like a Channeler Initiate Heart of Kirin deck. Although you can probably do some really cute things with, right, you can put the trigger on the stack and then crew the Heart of Kirin and then put the counters on the Channeler Initiate. So there are some cute things you can do in that regard. But I might explore something like that. I think we're both in agreement that Hazoret is the card that sticks out the most as being problematic. And then as far as 5-drops, I think I just want more Glorybringers. The main thing that I have noticed in playing with and against Glorybringer is that if you actually just go Glorybringer into Glorybringer, I've lost to that a ton of times, and I've won with that basically every time I've ever done it.
Yeah. So for me, I would like jam more mana dorks, like Michael and I are saying, and I actually would go up on to a 3rd Glorybringer, and possibly even if I'm going to play 2 mana dorks, I definitely want 4-drops like Bristling Hydra in my deck, and I would increase those. Other than that, like I actually don't hate where this deck stands right now. I think Cut to Ribbons is an interesting place. Being able to kill a lot of things. Actually, I literally was thinking today how I wish that there was a 2-mana spell, even at sorcery speed, that dealt more damage. I was like, I swear there is one, but I can't think of a mono red spell that does that. And now I know that I need to go back to that deck list. And
I can imagine Cut to Ribbons being pretty good in this metagame. There's a lot of like, if you're playing the green-black deck, you need to be able to kill their stuff for 2. Yeah. And if you're playing the Temur Energy deck, you really want to be able to kill their mana dorks for 2, or else you keep getting Chandra or whatever. Yep. So I think Cut and Fatal Push are both pretty good right now.
Yep. So I think that there are cards in this deck that stand up really well right now, kind of like what Michael and I are saying. But I think that like the format has changed in a way that I want to be a little more aggressive in the side of like ramping up my creatures. Kind of just be a real monsters deck is kind of how I feel about it. Like I want to be green-red monsters, and I don't know that I want to be green-red gods, I think is the difference.
That might be true. I think Ronis holds up pretty well in a monsters style shell, given that you're going to have a lot of things to turn it on, but Hazoret maybe not quite as well.
Cool. Let's go on to our next segment, which is Card of the Week. So every week on the show, we want to talk about a card that's doing really well, that's doing something impressive, that's just making an impact in Magic. And, once a month, we'll do Card of the Month, where everybody who donates at least $3 per month will actually receive a play set of whatever the card is during that week. This week is just a Card of the Week, and let's talk about Mox Opal. So Mox Opal is 0 mana. It is an artifact that when you have what is the keyword?
Metalcraft.
When you have Metalcraft, it can tap for one color of any color, and it's a legendary artifact. So I want to talk really quick about Affinity and why this is the card of the week. So I think this is the best card in the deck by like a pretty big margin.
I think it's the best card in Modern by like a pretty huge margin.
Yeah, would you say so?
I don't think it's even sort of close.
Why don't you go explain?
I mean, it's the most broken card in Modern by a pretty huge margin. There's real deck building cost, and if people are going to jam, if you're going to play against 4 Stony Silences per round or whatever, it's possible that Affinity isn't the best deck choice, and this can only really be played in Affinity or I guess like a Kirkland Ironworks deck or whatever. But I think fundamentally,
or what's it called?
Lantern,
Lantern,
sure,
yeah.
but like you're playing decks that are soft to Stony Silence basically. So if Stony Silence is really hot right now, there's some chance that you don't want to be playing the Mox Opal deck. But I think in terms of like, it's mostly just actually 5-color Mox with no drawbacks in Affinity, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no other deck gets to play anything close to that kind of power level.
Yeah. So, so fun fact, I don't know the last time, and I'm sure that I can look this up and I'd be wrong, but I don't remember the last time I lost this early in a Grand Prix, which I lost in round 2 of this Grand Prix, which I don't think I've done in a long time in the Constructor Grand Prix. And I ran into some like weird decks. And basically what I wanted to be playing against was Affinity. And I think Affinity guys dodged their bad matchup because that deck crushed it this weekend. Had 2 in the top 8, one of them winning. I mean, the deck just did well, and honestly, I think that it has a very clear and identifiable way that it tries to beat up on the Grixis Death Shadow deck in the form of flyers. The other decks just don't have like this is how I'm doing this. Basically, I think, every time.
Yeah. I think that's really true. Matt was saying this to me, and it kind of resonated with me a lot, actually, because I think I'm certainly guilty of this sometimes. But he was saying the more Kolaghan's commands are in a format, actually often the better Affinity is, because people just start being like, people are just like, oh, well, I have Kolaghan's command, so I don't need to play real hate cards. And Kolaghan's command, while being good, I mean, it's obviously good against Affinity. You can't cut sideboard cards for the matchup because you have 2 main deck Kolaghan. It's just not real life.
This happened when Jund, like regular Jund, was the best deck when Kolaghan's command was first introduced for a little while. I think you might have been on the podcast when this happened, where like people were like, well, I have 3 Kolaghan's commands, so I'm just gonna like cut an Ancient Grudge and cut a Shatterstorm. And then all of a sudden, like Affinity like goes and like does well at a couple of tournaments. People are like, okay.
Yeah.
We
still need sideboard cards. Back. Right, Kolaghan's command looks really stupid when your opponent goes like Mox Opal, play my entire hand on turn 1, and you're like
cards on turn 1, you're like
right, and you're like, well, on turn 3, I'm gonna 2-for-1 you so hard. They're just like, I mean, yeah, if you're like alive,
yeah,
right.
And what Chad is saying is correct, is that a lot of it has to do with like, there are times where you have to pick, right? You have to pick a lane. And it's like, all right, I can either bring Graveyard Hate for like these dredge decks and get a little bit of love against these Snapcaster, Tarmogoyf style decks, or I can bring my Affinity Hate. And like sometimes you have to just say no to Affinity Hate, but I think right now might be the time to put that hate back in your sideboard for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I understand the temptation as far as leaning more on hate that like it doesn't. Stony Silence feels so narrow, right? Like you're not really going to play against Lantern that many times. You're probably not going to play against Carcoline Ironworks at all. You might play against Affinity, but other than that, it's just like it is a card that doesn't do anything. Right, Rest in Peace is like, oh, well, I might play against like Abzan, and it's good against their Tarmogoyfs and Grim Flayers and Lingering Souls, and it's pretty good against Grixis Death Shadow. It's pretty good it's really good against Jund Death Shadow. Like, so you get all this kind of build up of like, oh, well, Rest in Peace is just a good Magic card right now, and Stony Silence is just for Affinity. But literally every time this has ever happened, then Affinity just wins, right? Because it's sure. Like it's super oppressive. It is a deck.
It's a lot of the reason that the pros are like, it's funny. Casey and I, if Casey was on this podcast, he'd be talking about this. Because like Casey and I like made a blood oath at a PTQ, an old modern PTQ. We were like, listen, I will never cut the Affinity Hate from my sideboard. Like, let's promise each other that. And we were like, okay. And then like 4 months later, Casey walks into my house. He goes, I broke our oath, man.
Yeah.
It's like, what happened? He's like, I didn't play Affinity Hate. I was like, oh, did you win the tournament? He goes, no.
Oh,
no,
you got crushed by Affinity.
I lost to Affinity twice. I was like, yeah, that's why we made our agreement.
Right.
And like,
no,
I think that our card of the week, Mox Opal, has like a huge deal to do with this because it really gives these decks like these insane draws.
No, I mean, Mox Opal is the card that makes Stony Silence necessary.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you cannot beat a deck that gets to play 4 Rainbow Mocks if you're not playing hate cards. Like,
yeah.
Just make it, just literally putting that sentence into words makes it pretty obvious why, right? If they get to play 4 Rainbow Mocks and you're just like playing normal Modern or whatever, your deck sucks.
Yeah.
Like, their deck is just going to be way, way better. So you need to basically cripple them in some games, because your game ones, like, no matter how much of it you think you have, like, oh, I have 4 Fatal Pushes and a Bolt and Snapcaster and, some Kolaghan's commands, that stuff is just slow compared to good affinity draws.
Yep. All right. Let's move on to our power rankings every week on the show. That's it. That's it for the card of the week. I think we've summarized Mock Silva, encapsulated perfectly in what Michael just said. Monty won, by the way. Monty won with affinity
on a mold of 4, right?
On a mold of 4. It's because it's card of the week, not card of the month, Mason.
But yeah, I think one on a mold of 4 and made like a turn 3 etched champion that was attacking for 10 or something on a mold of 4. It's like,
yeah, no, and
yeah, sure.
And also shout out to Monty. Guy taught me how to play the game of Mao, and it's a great game. If you're ever interested and you want to play it at GP, let me know. I'll show you.
One for reference, Matt was saying he was sitting next to Money at the end of day 1. And his opponent Anger the Gods him, and then is all tapped out past the turn back, and he plays like Ravager, Memnite, Ornithopter, some creature, and then immediately sacrifices all but one of them to Ravager, making it a 3/3. Just on the soul read that his opponent has Sudden Shock, and Matt's sitting on the other side of the table and can see the Sudden Shock in his opponent's hand. It's just like, yeah, it seems so good.
Get him!
Yeah,
that's so great.
It was just like,
that's a dude that was destined to win a GP, right there.
So you know why? I mean, as good as Affinity is, it's very difficult to play through hate, and if you're going to win a GP with Affinity, you almost certainly have to just be a master. It's not a deck you're just going to pick up and run rampant through 18 rounds or whatever. You need to know what you're doing.
All right, let's go into our pairing. So every week on the show, we want to talk about the decks that are doing well in a given Magic format. And we're going to do something we've never done. Ready for this? We're going to talk about Standard, and we're going to use MTG Goldfish, which, by the way, is just a mistake. We should definitely be using MTGO stats. That's our bad. But I'm sure they won't be that different.
Yeah.
Well, the actual problem is that MTGO stats is just like algorithm that takes it, so it would like still include Aetherworks Marvel at this point.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's usually MTGO stats pulls only more recent data, but given how recent this ban was, it's probably still a little wonky.
Yep. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna we've never used like specifically MTGO data to give power rankings for standard before. But this time we want to do it just to be like help people get a little bit ahead of the metagame.
Yeah, it doesn't really do anyone any good to say Aetherworks Marvel is the number 1 deck, right?
Right.
That's just not doing a lot.
Right. So coming in at number 5 right now, we have Green-Black Delirium.
Yeah. But this is kind of the new version of Green-Black Delirium, right? It's still a snake deck.
It's almost like 6 cards off of the Lucas Blohan deck.
Yeah, basically the changes are Traverse. Well, I mean, I would compare this to Green-Black Energy at this point. It's like Traverse becomes Attune, and Grimflayer becomes Gleensleeve Siphoner, and then Evolving Wilds becomes Aether Hub. But the decks are very similar.
The literal deck that won the GP from Lucas Blohan played 1 less Murder, 1 more Never Return, 2 less Grasp of Darkness, 2 more Dissenter's Deliverance, 1 less Liliana, 1 more Nissa in the main, and that's it. That's the entire difference. This is a deck that I've played a lot of recently. It's actually been the deck I've been playing in Standard for like a few weeks. Okay, so let's talk really quick about this. I actually believe this is the best deck in Standard right now for a few reasons. Like like this moment, if you were to ask me the best deck, I would tell you that like this is it. The reason is because of how good Fatal Push is right now, for one, how good Walking Ballista is for two, and then the ability to grind out comparatively like Mardu with this deck that you don't get out of the energy deck. Like all adds up to me thinking that like if I'm taking a starting point in this format, this style of Delirium deck is very easy to turn on Delirium. It has everything I need. I've just been super impressed with it, and this is where I would start in trying to scope and learn the format.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole operation is really powerful, right? Like we've played a bunch of these decks, and both this and energy are just really smooth. Like you just have good mana, you have a good curve, you have cards that if your opponent can't answer will almost single-handedly win games in like Grim Flare and Whining Constrictor. I mean, Whining Constrictor is just really powerful. It makes Walking Ballista great. It makes Nissa great. Makes Verdurous Gearhulk and Rishkar great. It sometimes even makes Tireless Tracker great. It's just a powerful deck. Like it's very linear in a certain sort of way. Like a lot of your games play out very similarly, but you just play good cards at every point on the curve. Really cheap, efficient removal. Some good planeswalkers. Like there's no way you're going to bring this deck to a tournament and at the end of the tournament be like, oh man, this deck was so bad.
Right.
Right. Even when you're losing, I think this deck just feels smooth and powerful.
Right. Yeah, and then it has nut draws just like you kind of want from some amount of decks, between turn 2 Snake, turn 3 Rishkar.
Right. And then tap the Rishkar, play a Verdurous, spread the counters. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Turn 5 kill easy. You can do a lot of stuff like that. I think these lists are interesting. It's a little bit weird to play Liliana and Nissa in the same deck. I would imagine it can lead to some kind of problematic hands in terms of mana sometimes, but Traverse is really nice. These decks are just good. I think both this and Green-Black Energy, just solid.
Yeah, I think this deck is really powerful. I think that it's interesting that like lists so close to what Lucas Blohan have been, like played are doing well on Moto right now. Like now there is some amount of like known deck, right? So like some of your wins come from like being somewhat figured out, but I think this deck is pretty powerful. Let's move on to Mardu next. I actually looked at Mardu decks for a little while today, and is it just me or like people playing like 59 of the same 60 or like 58 of the same 60 in almost every 5-0?
Yeah, I mean the only choice that it looks like is a choice right now is your 3-drop and your 5-drop. Pretty much the rest of it is completely solved.
Yeah, so like, and also whatever your 3-mana vehicle you want, so you can pick. Some of them play the 5/5.
It's very it leans heavily at this point towards 1 Harvester, 4 Heart. That is the split I've seen by far most.
Yes, absolutely.
Where I've seen is like, yeah, I've seen some lists playing like 1 Glorybringer, 1 Avacyn, or 2 Glorybringer, 1 Avacyn. I've seen a couple lists playing like PNLR over Thalia, but the rest of the deck is just basically straight locked. And then obviously the sideboard changes a little bit. Some people, I've seen some without like the Oath of Ana's. I've seen different planeswalker configurations. I've seen an extra land in the board sometimes. I mean, obviously sideboard is just going to be a little bit more personal. But this deck is basically solved, and it's really good again now that you're not having to play against as many Dissenter's Deliverances and Aetherworks Marvel.
Yeah, also, like, I think that I don't know why people never figured out that, like, this deck had a terrible Aetherworks Marvel matchup, but it was really bad. And, having that deck be a smaller percentage of the metagame is actually just really good for Mardu.
And you're getting it on both ends, right? Because it also means that there's less Manglehorns, right? I mean, you get sort of double bumped. And I mean, this deck was still playable before, so, I mean, obviously it's going to be pretty great right now.
Yep, coming up next, we have Mono Black Zombies. This is making up 13.19% of the metagame, so like a pretty big share. Personally, I think this deck is super hard to play. It's a tough one. But I think that like if you play it correctly, you can gain edges in a lot of different ways, which is really important. And I think that it has like some of the most powerful removal in the format.
Yeah, I've always found this deck to have a pretty good Mardu match. So if Mardu be kind of in vogue as the number one deck again, that would make me really interested in playing this. Things I like about Mono Black, like look at that mana base. And he's not even playing any Westphal Abbeys. He's just like, no, we're just gonna be on the 24 swamp plan. If you can't appreciate 24 swamps in a deck, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, it's not quite 24 forest, but I can appreciate it still.
Fair enough.
I think this deck is just good. Like, it's everything that Danny Cathro wishes the deck was, at the Pro Tour. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just like you just get a lot of good removal. Dark Salvation is great. Obviously, Lord of the Accursed is great. Diregraph Colossus is, I wouldn't say great, but
I would
sometimes feel like it's great. I think the number of Chandra Flamecallers taking a huge hit makes me potentially interested in that. So like that in combination with maybe Mardu moving up makes me understand why I'd be interested in this deck again. But yeah, if it looks appealing, like this is definitely the better version than Black White now that you don't want to play Anguish Unmaking.
Yep.
Just really solid deck.
All right, you get to talk about Glensleeve Siphoner. Go nuts, Michael.
Yeah, so there are less walking ballistas now than there have been in a while. So Glensleeve Siphoner is like, an actual playable Magic card again. And my biggest qualm with this deck is that I don't really like Long Tusk Cub. I have a 5/0 and some 4/1s with green black energy, and Long Tusk Cub is pretty mediocre right now, I think. But playing like main deck Blossoming Defenses and Glensleeve Siphoners is this
Your
deck,
dream.
It's really nice. It's just like a really good kind of like tempo deck that has some really nutty curve draws as well. It's good. It's not anything fancy, but Glensleeve Siphoner is dying a lot less than it has in the past.
I do like that this deck plays more Pima. I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, one of the things I think that people are looking at with this style of list in particular is one of the reasons Glensleeve Siphoner is so good is that you're between Rishkar and Walking Ballista, you can actually like really allow it to get in there over and over and over again. I can't tell you how many games I've played where I got to attack with a Glensleeve Siphoner on turn like 3 through 7. Because some combination of counters and pinging blockers and fatal pushing blockers just made them never able to actually block it. And it would deal them like 15 damage and draw me 7 cards or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that seems good.
I find it interesting that we're on opposite spectrums as to like which one of these versions of the deck we like between Delirium and. I mean, I do like mid-range a lot, so like I probably am just naturally drawn to that deck. Do you actually think this one is better? Should I be trying this?
I am not sure. I don't like Long Tusk Cub, and it's possible that you could just jam Aether Hubs into the other one.
You could just mash the decks together and make like
because I would I think I'd rather just play Grimflayer than Long Tusk Cub regardless. And I don't think you really need to try very hard to get Delirium when you're playing like Walking Ballista.
No, it's like automatic.
Yeah. So I might be interested because Long Tusk Cub has felt like the biggest link in this deck by so much.
Cool.
It's just weak to Fatal Push, and it like you'd think it would be good with Glensleeve Siphoner, but not really. They both kind of compete for the same resource. And honestly, Long Tusk Cub is way better if your opponent just like isn't playing Magic. They just don't have a removal spell or a blocker. You just like kill it. You can just people just die to Long Tusk Cub. But I think I would like more Tramplers in the deck, as well as a little more card selection at times. And Grimflayer kind of hits both of those notes.
Yeah, I've always wanted more Pimas in my Grimflayer deck, so like finding a way to combine these decks. I'm already playing Blossoming Defense in my version of the other deck. I think that it's a fine 1/2/2 of in the deck. So like finding room to kind of like jam these a little bit together. It might be only 3 Glensleeve Siphoners or something, but like I still am willing to kind of find a line that I like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think perhaps worth trying, but I think either of these decks is pretty good, honestly, and it's mostly down to personal preference. Like they're powerful.
Yeah, I also like Linseed Siphoner, so that's probably why I'm willing to try it. Let's go on to our next deck, and our deck of the week. We have Temur Energy. So Temur Energy is, this deck was already good, and it had a bad Marvel matchup, and then a good everything else matchup. And so, did it have a good everything else matchup? Was that hyperbole?
I don't know. Honestly, I haven't played much Standard in the last month or so, so I'm
Well,
a little bit out of it.
I have played this deck a little bit, and let's talk really quick about the deck, and kind of what you're looking for with it. So Temur Energy is the number one deck by about 4%. It is the core of the energy package. So it has Servant of the Conduit, Rogue Refiner, Harness Lightning, Attune with Ether, and then it has 4 drops in the form of Chandra and Bristling Hydra, and then it plays Glorybringer, Warlord Virtuoso, stuff like that. One of the things that this deck does really well is it gets to play very few lands in a mid-range deck, and its tap lands being Attune with Ether, add to its game plan really well. So like the key cards in the deck are the energy package, right? They're the Attune with Ethers, the Harness Lightnings, the Server of the Conduits, and the Rogue Refiners. I've seen a few different styles of this deck, whether it's Long Tusk Cub or Elder Deep Fiend. There are things that you have to consider. But eventually, you have to decide if your opponent's playing Elder Deep Fiend because you can't play around it the entire game. I think that's like a really important thing to note. The other thing is that they'll all be playing Glorybringer, and it's something that you really need to be conscious of when you're like making your tap out decisions.
Yeah, the main thing I've noticed with Black Green is like you have to be really careful if you have a Grasp of Darkness specifically. It's like a Fatal Push you just spend the first time you get the chance to, but Grasp of Darkness specifically you often need to sandbag because you will literally not be able to beat a Glorybringer. And I think that that's true of a lot of decks. Like you need to figure out what your plan is against Glorybringer because this deck will punish you with them. And especially if they're playing Deep Fiend, I've had a couple of people go like Deep Fiend into Glorybringer, or like Glorybringer into you untap and play a blocker for it, like a Mind Rack Demon or something like that, and they're like Baral's Expertise, your blockers, and it can just spiral. You can feel like everything is fine, and then it's just happening to you.
What do you think of Baral's Expertise?
I'm not sure. As long as control is basically unplayable, I actually I kind of want to try a Temur list with a couple in the main deck because that card feels, when you're actually just getting to like against green black, it is insane. Like mostly the end of the game every single time you cast it. So I think it's sweet, but it definitely has some matchups where it's just literally not a magic card. You're like, well, I'm not bouncing your Gear Hulk, so guess I'm not bouncing anything.
So what do you think is like the key to this deck? So I mean, this is like 4-color Saheeli minus the white, minus the Saheelis, right before it was banned, right? So it's like this Glorybringer mid-range deck. But it seems like a lot of people are moving closer to the Long Tusk Cub version of this deck and further away from the deck that was played at the Pro Tour with like Elder Deep Fiends. Which side of that do you want to be on comparatively? Because as someone who's played that deck, I actually prefer to be on the Elder Deep Fiend side where I can like really win board stalls in the mirror.
I think I do as well. Long Tusk Cub is like really powerful, but it's sort of so powerful that it like creates, it's a very linear magic card, right? It's good at exactly one thing. It's not good if your opponent has Warlord Virtuoso. It's not good if your opponent just has like a Magma Spray or a Harness Lightning or like some way to just kill it. And you're not playing Blossoming Defense for like the blowouts that you sometimes get in the green-black energy deck. So I'm not a huge fan of it here. I think my leaning would be to try, so like compared to the list that we have pictured, which I believe is by Collins Mullen, I think I might try like Channeler Initiates and then basically cut the negates and the confiscation coup for like more Deep Fiends and maybe a second Baral's Expertise or something like that. That would be sort of where I would start. Spencer, I think you're muted.
Oh, thank you. The literal last list of 5-0 was playing 3 Elder Deep Fiend. It was much more streamlined. It didn't have negates in the main, which is something that I really like. I think that this deck is weirdly still getting figured out because a lot of its evolution, like people knew it was like a go-to deck that was like easy to acquire, so they're still trying to figure it out. And the core of the deck is really powerful, which is what's important here. But I personally, if I'm going to be playing these mirror matches, I would be playing Elder Deep Fiend. I think I'd be playing maybe 3 Whirler Virtuosos, at most 2 to 3 Long Tusk Cups, and main deck negates.
Yeah, I kind of want to try some like 8 mana dork builds, and then lean a little harder on like Tracker and Hydra compared to maybe this one. Because I feel like if you have like Tracker, Hydra, Chandra as things to like ramp out, that makes playing a bunch of mana dorks
like
worth
that a
it
lot.
Potentially. There aren't like an insane amount of Walking Ballistas or 3 mana Lilianas. So Channel Initiated I think is okay. If it ends up not being okay, I could see trying something like this again, but I'm not. Long Tusk Cub is like, it's really powerful sometimes, but I hate how inconsistent it is. It's very dependent on drawing it on turn 2 and having 2 energy already.
And be on the play a lot of the time too.
Yes, it's just like there are a lot of games you'll play where it just doesn't play out very well. I think.
Do you consider
if you
4 Warlord Virtuosos to be a must in this list?
No, I don't. And I think it's because when you're not playing, so like at the very end, it looked like the Marvel lists were working more like control decks and kind of trimming down on Whirlers. But in this style of deck, it's a nice effect to have. But what I would say is that, so the second Rogue Refiner is just as good as the first. The second Whirler Virtuoso is much worse than the first. And I
absolutely.
I think when we're looking at cards that like you'd consider as a 2 versus a 3 versus a 4 of, that's a really important thing to look at. Like I'm tempted to play 4 Glorybringers simply because the second one is actually much better than the first one. But I think Whirler Virtuoso is the kind of card where you want to draw exactly 1.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to draw 2, you don't want to draw 0, you want to draw 1.
I think that Glorybringer is another one where I don't always understand people's numbers. So for me personally, like I can't see myself playing less than 3 literally ever. And here's the main reason: is this deck is pretty happy to go like Glorybringer into Glorybringer, and really press its advantage compared to like other Glorybringer decks. And you can't do that. Like the more you cut on Glorybringer, the less draws of that you have, right? You just have less Glorybringers in your deck to like gain that equity that your deck is really built to abuse. And because of that, I think that for me, it's important to have more Glorybringer, not less.
I agree with that totally. I think 3 is, if I'm not playing at least 3, I just don't know what the appeal of this deck is.
Right.
This is a Glorybringer deck, and if Glorybringer isn't good, I don't think this deck is remotely playable.
Yep, completely agree. Any tips or tricks that you have on playing this deck if people were picking it up?
I would just try to be conscious. I mean, the main thing that I've seen happen a few times and seen people get burned on pretty bad is these are pretty basic, but make sure that you have at least 3 energy when you play Bristling Hydra, or you can have a really bad time because they can kill with a trigger on the stack. Be cautious about -3ing Chandra against green-black, both because of Blossoming Defense and Walking Ballista. Like I've had a bunch of games with green-black where my opponent has gotten maybe a little bit trigger happy with their Chandra, and rather than trying to protect it, they start trying to use it to protect itself. And I've gotten to blow out a couple of people pretty bad like that. Brawl's expertise is
one thing to
insane.
mention on that, if I can really quick, is oftentimes you'll like look at the board, you'll be like, okay, like, and specifically against green black, this has happened against me as somebody who's played a lot of green black, is like they'll play their Chandra, kill my only creature on board, and I'll have like 5 mana. I'm like, well, okay, untap, play Walking Ballista for 2, kill your Chandra, go. And it's like a really...
Exactly. And the key is that when you're not having to actually use up your Walking Ballista, like because it gets to hang around on 1, now it's a big target for Verdus Gearhulk. You still can't really harness lightning it because you're not getting any energy out of it, and they still get to shoot something. Like the Walking Ballista being on board is annoying enough that,
especially against this deck.
Right. Try to be judicious with where you're minusing your Chandra. Just if you have to, you have to. And like, I totally get that. You don't always have a choice, But if you have the choice between trying to protect it via creating creatures and trying to protect it via minusing, my inclination is to not minus it.
Yeah, I will say that we didn't mention this, but I think that Magma Spray as a 1 to 2 of is also a must-have in this deck. One of the things that this deck really wants to be able to do is to play one of its fast lands and or Ether Hub really quickly, and because of that, you want as many things that you can be doing on 1 mana. So having 2 Harness Lightnings to really maximize that, I think, is pretty important.
Or 2 Magma Sprays rather to go along with your Harness Lightnings.
Is that sorry? What did I say?
Yeah.
Did I say Harness
Just
Lightning?
said Harness Lightnings, which
Yeah, I
is
meant
also,
Magma Spray.
I mean, the other reason to actually play this deck is because Harness Lightning
Is the best removal spell in Standard, and it's not close.
I think sometimes it's close, but
What's it close
I think it's best. I think Fatal Push, depending on the matchup. Harness Lightning is more versatile, but sometimes the mana efficiency of Fatal Push is really clutch.
I have actually been really impressed with Fatal Push in my green black decks lately, so I could kind of see your argument.
It just depends. Like I mean, much in the same way that this deck uses Magma Spray, Fatal Push is Magma Spray that also kills Heart of Kiran, right?
I did get to spend almost all weekend with a Wizards of the Coast employee, who and his literal words were, "We consider Harness Lightning to be Doomblade."
Like, yeah, I mean it's good. I just think Fatal Push is sometimes actually better than Doomblade.
Sure.
I
can dig it. I can dig it.
I mean, obviously you can't say that unequivocally, and Fatal Push can be borderline unplayable in Standard depending on, you know, how things go in terms of format development. But Harness Lightning is extremely good in this deck. Like sort of the multi-mode, like being able to kill like a Glintstave Siphon or whatever and actually generate 2 energy to put a counter on your Long Tusk Cub or allow your Servant to go more. Like it's better than Doomblade in this deck because it kind of goes both ways.
Right. I want to kind of wrap this up by kind of talking about matchups really quick. So as somebody who's played this deck, I find that my matchup against Mardu is pretty reasonable. I think it's a huge reason to play this deck. You know, between Magma Spray, Harness Lightning, Glory Bringer, Whirler Virtuoso, you just have a lot of cards that are good in the matchup. They don't have a lot of ways to kind of stop you from Whirlering them, and then you can Elder Deep Fiend them to kill their Gideon really easily. Even in this list, you have Brawl's expertise to just really be able to kill that Gideon. It's so easy to make that matchup net positive for you that's a huge reason to play this deck. And also it gets to be like the Chandra Glorybringer deck. And I think that Chandra has always been a card that we'd want to see as a 2 of in this Standard, like early on in Pro Tour testing for that, like the first thing we were like is like, well, this card's broken, like where can we fit this? And the more times that we've been in Standard, the more times that people have found the place to play Chandra. And this is the Chandra deck right now, which is not nothing. So
yeah, I mean Chandra is good. I think this deck is pretty good in general. I have found that the green-black matchup is not great for this deck in the pre-board games, but a lot of that depends on how many Brawl's expertise you have access to. Brawl's expertise is mostly unbeatable in that matchup, and if you cast it and you're not like just dead, you pretty much can't lose. And if you don't cast it, it's very hard to win. So that is sort of a weird statement in that like one card really swings that matchup so much, but that is what I have found.
Yep. Awesome. Well, that is it for Deck of the Week. That's it for the Power Rankings. Every week on the show, we're going to be talking about a deck that is doing well and the Power Rankings, which will break down the kind of things that you need to prepare for your next event. Let's go on to our training grounds, though. So this week we're talking about a deck building training grounds, and we're going to talk about understanding flex slots. So we're specifically talking about thing that people talk about that I believe the term is stolen from fantasy football. Maybe it's not, but I think that's where it comes from. Michael, why don't you really quick help people understand, like, what is a flex slot?
So a flex slot.
If you say wide receiver, running back, I'm going to be really upset.
Well, the main idea is that, I mean, on the most basic level, we're saying it's a flexible slot, right? So it's something that you're not locked into. It's a card that could be multiple different cards depending on metagame, depending on decks you're aiming to beat, depending on how you like to play a deck, what you're looking for, all that kind of stuff. So basically, in a lot of decks, you're going to have some cards. You're probably not going to cut Heart of Kiran from Mardu, right? But maybe you're looking at Thalia Heretic Cathar and saying, I don't have to play this.
Actually, Mason, if you would pull up that Mardu deck really quick, I think that Mardu is kind of the perfect thing. We kind of talked about this a little bit during the power ranking segment, but there are definitive flex slots that a lot of people believe exist within this Mardu archetype right now. I know that you'll disagree with me on this, but like on the 3-mana vehicle one, but like the ones that I've seen that people wash around on are the 3-mana vehicle, your 5-drop, and your 3-drop. And that's basically it. Like those are cards that you get to play with.
Right. No one is cutting on License Disintegration. No one is cutting Scrap Heap Scrouncher. No one's really cutting like Toolcraft Exemplar or Thread Inspector, right? Like those are cards that are they're part of Mardu Vehicles. If you're playing Mardu Vehicles, you're playing 4 of these. Right. Yeah. And then
and Chat's talking about Chat's talking about Motorist right now. And yeah, while in the past Motorist between it or things like Walking Ballista have been a flex slot, right now like the definitive answer that people have come to is to play Motorist. That could change, so it could become one of those things that you can flex in and out, but like the key cards that people are changing are those specific ones, and those are pretty important cards if you think about it. Like the difference between Pia and Thalia is actually a pretty big difference.
Right. So it's not necessarily that these cards are unimportant to the deck. What it means is that they're less central to the basic functionality, right? So in some metagames or matchups, Thalia is going to be really powerful. In other metagames or matchups, you might say that Pia is going to be better. And I think that just having an idea of what cards do and what they're good against is sort of the first step to understanding what flex spots are doing for you and why you're interested in them, right? Understanding that these cards are powerful, but they don't do the same thing.
Absolutely. And I think that, outside of just Mardu, we just talked about, the number of Glory Bringers that you play, the number of World of Virtuosos that you play, right? There are cards that are going to define your deck in different ways, and you're going to choose them according to matchups, but there are also going to be cards that you never cut from your deck, right? Those cards are not flex cards. You kind of mentioned this, right? I'm probably never cutting Gideon from my Mardu deck.
Well, so you may sideboard out these cards sometimes, but you're probably never cutting them from the main deck. Just to be totally clear, right?
Yeah,
you're probably like, it's not that it's never not good. It's that like, if I'm playing, Gideon is really good in my white creature deck with Heart of Kiran's, right? Just on kind of a fundamental level.
Right. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of times where there are different things that can be flex slots in your deck depending on what the strategy of your deck is, removal suites, right? So for mid-range and control decks, a lot of times your flex slots are actually the removal spells that you play, right? And that will depend upon the creatures that are in the format and the things that you need to be beating game ones, right? Those are going to be really important to like what you include into your main deck, and then your flex slots will also be impacted by that because you're this mid-ranger control deck, right?
Yeah, so I think that when you look at removal spells, like if no one is playing 2 toughness creatures, right, Magma Spray is going to lose a lot of utility, right? If your deck isn't generating enough energy for Harness Lightning to kill, 4/5s, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to be playing there. There's all kinds of stuff. You could play all kinds of different spells in these slots, but when we're looking at like the energy deck, right, those don't have to be Magma Sprays. If Zombies just ceased being a deck and you weren't playing against Mardu very much, you would probably move away from Magma Spray because you'd be playing against a bunch of Whining Constrictors, right? And you'd be like, well, it only deals 2 damage, so it's probably just not very good.
A good example of this is during the era of the Sihili combo, I saw some Aetherworks Marvel lists with Shock filling the flex slots, and I was like, whoa! Like this gives me Mardu and Saheeli hate, and I like jammed this in a couple of events, started jamming it on Moto. I was like, man, this flex slot changes so much of the deck because it makes this card that didn't matter in my deck matter all of a sudden. And that's like kind of what the power of a flex slot is, right? So you might look at decks like the Temur Energy deck that we just talked about, right? Where there are metagames where like those magma sprays just become negates. You're like, all right, well,
Right.
the thing that I really need to beat are these specific spells. I'm going to jam negates in this slot to go and combat that thing. That's kind of what the power of that is. Now, this is obviously specifically talking about Michael's favorite word, net decks, right? But this is where you get that power to go and innovate inside of that to give yourself the best chance to win. You can also look at things like creatures, right? What you could think, like when you look at like Collected Company, right? This was full of like, what are the specific creature types and that I want in this deck? Creature type is loaded in Magic. What are the specific numbers on the creatures that I want? And then what matchups do I want them? Do I want, Lambo Pacifist? Do I want this? Do I want that? And then building that deck accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think just actually a lot of what makes you able to build your decks effectively and to utilize the flex slots that you have is an understanding of how Magic cards line up in different matchups, right? Understanding why Lambholt Pacifist may or may not be a good choice in certain matchups, why, Magma Spray or Negate, or like not just how do these cards line up, but where do they line up? Where do I need different cards? Why is it specific that I want this card in this matchup and this card in this matchup? And from there, how do we build not only a 60 card deck, but multiple 60 card decks and in sort of a cohesive 75 that allows for clean sideboarding, that allows for basically what you're really trying to do is in the sideboarded games, most of the time you're not cutting the main best cards in the deck. You're sort of flipping around a bunch of different flex spots to find the best configuration in that matchup. And I think that if you can come to a good understanding of how these spells line up, when you want different ones, what matchups you want these cards for, and how you want your deck to look in all these matchups, you can build really cohesive decks.
I think so too. When we talk really quick about, you kind of mentioned matchups and how you use your flex slots. Is there something specific that I think the meta game and the matchups kind of go together, right? You're going to make the decision as to the cards that you put in your deck because of that meta game, and that meta game is built up upon matchups that you expect to play against and what your percentages are in those matchups. So if you're going to increase your game one or your sideboard percentages, you're going to choose cards accordingly for those spots. Can you talk about that really quick?
Yeah, I think that there are kind of a couple of different minds when it comes to how you like to use the flex slots in your deck, whether you prefer more narrow cards in the main deck when you expect pretty pigeonholed metagames, or whether you're trying to beat a more open field, so you're looking for a little more flexibility in those main deck cards. Obviously, after sideboarding, you're mostly going to have access to things for any common matchup, but I think when we're looking at game ones especially, your flex slots will help you. They'll help you determine what matchups you're prioritizing, right? So if you expect to play against a lot of green-black Constrictor, and we're going to say, oh, well, I think Baral's Expertise is probably the best card in that matchup, but it's not one that I would necessarily say is a staple on the main deck. We could flex a couple of those in if I anticipated that deck being really popular, or I just wanted my matchup there to be better than it was otherwise. So I think just understanding that like all of your card choices have impact, and that the best way to improve different matchups is to understand which cards are good in them and then choose accordingly, right? So I really think that is good to look at. And then we should probably also talk about how flex slots, just how they impact your deck building as a whole and what kind of costs are associated with.
Yeah, that was actually next on the show notes, is kind of understanding what kind of deck building costs are associated with this. When you look at, if you think about something like main deck Dissenter's Deliverance, right, or main deck Sweltering Suns might even be a better example. Like,
sure,
there are real deck building costs to like putting cycling cards in your deck. Now the deck building cost is lower than it would typically be, right? But like,
Right. It's a lot lower than a Shatter, right? So like people at some point were main decking Natural Obsolescence in some of the Temur Tower lists, I think.
right.
And then eventually Descender's Deliverance got printed, and the deck building cost to like playing main deck Artifact Hate got a lot lower. And I would say that that's sort of generally true. Like you can build a deck that isn't going to be awful in any matchups by playing more flexible cards in the main deck, right? Like you look at some of the lists playing a bunch of negates. Every deck has things to negate, right? There's no matchup you're going to play where negate just isn't a magic card. But so maybe you're avoiding some of these costs, but then that what's really happening is that you're maybe weakening matchups that you would wish you had more for.
Another thing to think about, I think that this is important. So, for example, I was testing and brewing with Jeskai Control today, and I wanted the reason I wanted to play Jeskai over, blue red is because of the top decks right now, right? The green black decks, the Temur Energy decks, right? Where I really want to play Fumigate. But one thing that I knew that I wanted is I still wanted a cheap sweeper in that deck. And while the mana is actually harder on something like Sweltering Suns, I would actually rather have that in the main in that spot than something like Radiant Flames. That has entirely to do with the deck building cost of it. Now, while it's harder to cast that other one, when I cast it, it's really impactful. And when I don't want to cast it, it means that I get to replace it, right? This is a flex spot that got to be included because the ability cycling existed. And that is really powerful.
Right. And I think we saw that a lot in the green-black Delirium decks of the last few weeks, right? Like before Dissenter's Deliverance was a card, none of those decks, despite being kind of weak to Heart of Kirin or Aetherworks Marvel, could have included Natural Obsolescence in the main deck, right? Because the deck building cost to playing that in one of your flex slots was just too high. So cycling is something that can really mitigate. And I think that's true not only with cycling, but really any kind of modal spell, right? I think of like Abzan Charm or Dramoka's Command probably being two of the best modal spells of the last few years. And that's because they had a lot of matchup flexibility, right? Were they powerful linear spells? Sometimes, yes. But they also, they could just do a variety of things. And I think like just never being dead, and Sweltering Suns kind of fits in that same category, right? It's a good sweeper, but being able to just get rid of it when that isn't a card you're looking for is pretty powerful.
The other thing, if you look at something, I mean, you just mentioned, we've talked about this green black, Descender's Deliverance a few times, is that it already had a hard time getting instant in the graveyard against certain decks. So the ability to just cycle it, put instant in the graveyard so that you can activate Delirium more easily was actually a huge benefit anyway. And it's something that if you didn't know that you wanted Artifact Hate in certain matchups, you might have never discovered that like this ability to cycle this card actually impacted your deck in other ways. And also, it makes it I want to say that like having flex slots in your deck makes sideboarding way easier. Like
Right.
your ability to sideboard with flex slots just becomes so much easier. When I don't want Descender's Deliverance in my deck, like
it's pretty obvious, right? You know. You're
right,
not looking
like,
at it thinking, oh, maybe this card is good.
Right.
No, you're looking at it and saying, no, this card is green, draw a card.
Right. And I don't want that card in my mid-range deck. And that's an important thing that you get to learn and like improve your deck post board because you have this information. So one of the questions that we might have is like, how do you know if you made the right decisions according to like what you put in your deck as flex slots, Michael?
Well, I think it's hard to say. Sometimes you'll know you were wrong because you really misjudged the metagame. So maybe you played a bunch of Descender's Deliverances in your green-black deck and then no one was playing Heart of Kirin's. So, you were basically just cycling it every time. And that's less bad than, say, main decking a bunch of Manglehorns, because these cards, so there's sort of like degrees to how flexible some of these cards really are, right? Some are really like narrow, almost hate cards, like a card like Manglehorn, whereas some are much more mild and you can like, there's less of a cost when they're bad, something like Descender's Deliverance. But generally, I think it just comes down to sort of keeping track of what you're playing against, thinking about how often you are removing these cards in game 2, and how much you would have rather had another card that you could realistically play. Because there will often be days where you will wish you'd had a different card in your main deck, but looking at the deck building, you just like couldn't really have main decked whatever it was that you were interested in. Like, you played a bunch of matchups where Yahenni's expertise was good in your green-black deck, but you probably just can't main deck it. I think you're muted again here, Spencer.
Twice. I said awesome. So, Michael, if you were to wrap this up and you were to tell somebody like how they could understand their flex slots and how to use them, what would you say?
So I would say that generally, and I'm curious of your opinion on this, generally decks that are less linear are going to have more flex slots.
Yes, I agree with that.
The more of like a combo deck you're playing, the more of a really, really aggressive deck you're playing, the less slots you're going to have that are able to just be whatever you want.
Right.
So I would say that is sort of the first thing.
We kind of touched on that in the control segment too, right? Where we're talking about like how decks that are control decks or mid-range decks, all of their removal basically becomes flex slots. They get to pick the removal that's available to them in the format compared to other decks. Whereas if you look at another deck, like, I mean, we talked about Mardu, right? Which had 5 flex slots total, and none of them were its removal spells.
Exactly. And I think that's true. Oftentimes, the more reactive your deck is, the more flex slots you have available. Because just for obvious reasons, right? You are responding to what your opponents are doing, and that naturally just leads to a game plan that's more interested in playing cards that are specifically good in a given matchup, rather than playing cards that are generically good and putting pressure on your opponent to answer them.
Right.
So I'd say that flex slots like play a big part in determining your tournament success often. It's not the only thing, obviously, but building a correct 75 often requires you to have your flex slots figured out pretty well, and you can sort of sit down after an event and kind of think about where things went well or where they went poorly. And a lot of the time, I think a surprising amount of the time, you'll end up looking at some of the deck building decisions you made with not even, what archetype am I playing, but just what were my 57th, 58th, 59th, and 60th cards.
Right. Awesome. Well, that is it for our turning rounds this week. You can join the show every week by becoming a Patreon. Go to patreon.com/ccmtg. Every week after the show, I post a poll that will give you the option for next week's training grounds. So if you become a patron just starting at $1 a month or more, you have an impact on what we talk about each week on the show through multiple avenues, whether it's the question of the week or just the poll. So, Michael, where can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook. My name is Michael Hindrocker. You can also find me on Twitter at MagicMikeMTG.
Best Twitter name. You can find me on Facebook at Spencer Stephen Howland. You can find me on Twitter at Spencer13H. You can find the podcast every week on the Manabase, ConstructorCriticism.com, and I am happy to announce, I think I'm done posting the podcast to MTGcast. So if you currently are subscribed through MTGcast, this podcast specifically won't be there anymore. Limited time only will still be there for a while, but we're just not going to post constructive criticism there for the time being. I love MTGcast, love everything that they do, but it does take time out of my day to do that. And we have our own RSS feed. You can find the podcast. And I don't think we'll be posting there anymore. We'll do this one, and the next couple will announce it for the next couple of weeks. But this podcast will be leaving MTGcast in the near future. But go subscribe, go find our RSS feed, and you can find constructive criticism on any of your apps, and we are happy to have you. So thank you so much for listening. You can join the conversation every week by joining our Facebook group. You have the Constructive Criticism family group where we got to interact with a ton of listeners from there, meet them in Vegas. I handed out tons of wristbands, just got to hang out with a ton of people, and we just appreciate those people so much. You can join that, talk to people who are trying to get better at Magic with you. People post their modern decks every Monday, just tons of stuff that's going on in that group. You can join the Constructive Criticism family there. You can also join the Discord chat. It's been a little bit dead lately, and I'd love for it to pick back up. But there's a constructive criticism family chat that I'll be in every single day. If I'm at work, I probably have it open. So if you want to be chatting with people, I'll be in there, and I'd be happy to chat with you. All of those links are in the on the website on the bios page. You can also join the clan by messaging me on MTGO at Spencer13Dev or Quinn at Earthstripe. That's URTHSTYRPE. He's not on Moto right now, so you'll probably have to message me. You can also tweet at us, finally, with hashtag Would That Be Good. Hashtag Would That Be Good is our Twitter outreach program. If you tweet it, we will read it, as Michael likes me to say. And we are starting.
It's just a good, just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah. We are starting with Andrew Elliott, who says, "Oh man, I feel famous, but like Donald Trump famous. Like I'm being put on blast. LOL." Hashtag Would That Be Good. What is this?
Well, because he was listening to the show last week and then was hearing all his tweets being read.
No. That's not what happened. If you read the reply, I actually posted a video to Twitter where I talked about winning my state championship listening to Taylor Swift all day. And called him out. All right. Well, Taylor Swift is great, so we can move on to Dylan, who says, "Closest PPTQ this weekend is in Quebec. Time to brush up on I don't know how to say French in French. Francis?
I mean, I don't know either, but I also don't have to go to Quebec, nor do I speak French. So it, feels mostly like not my kind of problem.
But if you can speak French, that's great for you. I wish I was bilingual. America's not very good at the whole, teaching their people to be bilingual. So
it's certainly true. But, yeah, it does sound like a good time to brush up on your French. It also sounds like a good time to, learn to play Magic mostly through gesture, which is fine anyways.
Just installed Google Fiber on my way out to GP Vegas. Hashtag Would That Be Good. Hashtag fuck Comcast. Really?
Well, you didn't have to read the second hashtag.
I mean, if you tweet it, we'll read it. But yeah, I agree with the second hashtag. I apologize to anybody who had children in the car. Yeah, good on you, man. Good on you.
Yeah. Look, my internet made it through a whole show.
Yeah, mine did
too.
Truly
an upgrade.
Congrats to DJ Catherine for making top 8 of GP Vegas. Time to get back at it. Hashtag Would That Be Good.
No. Time to back it.
Oh, that's
I think you were giving
better.
Danny some inspiration. It didn't quite get there the second time, but I think he'll settle for merely one top 8 in a week.
Yeah.
Only one GP top 8. Yeah. It's
for those,
so sad.
Those who don't know, Danny is my co-host on Limited Time Only. It's the analog podcast to this one. Every week we talk about limited magic instead of constructed magic. We have some awesome segments on there, and we're really kind of hitting our stride between me and Danny, and it's been really exciting. So go over there, check that out. It's just on the same RSS feed as Constructive Criticism for the time being. That'll change eventually, but right now we just want to let everybody who could get access to it. So,
yeah, Danny's great. Danny's a really nice guy.
Danny's super medium. He's super medium.
So you put him at like a an impeccable timing kind of medium, or better than impeccable timing?
It's better than it, but he's like Lingering Souls.
That seems pretty good in limited.
It's pretty good. Oh, in limited? Oh
yeah.
Oh no, he's not Lingering Souls. Danny's a Colossopede.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
Had a good back/arm workout listening to hashtag GP Vegas. I can barely lift the towel to dry off after my shower. Hashtag would be good. No, I don't like being wet, so I would probably.
Yeah, I mean, good and bad. I also I don't this is one that's confused me for a while. I feel like listening to a GP is just really hard.
I've done that many times.
What even happens?
I mean, you can't picture that in your head.
I mean, are they just is it just play by play? And they're and he plays the Colossopede and his board is and he has 3 cards in hand and they're and his opponent it just feels like it needs updating a lot.
Okay. I mean, you just listen to the commentary, right? Oftentimes, I'm sure that you're actually watching it too. It doesn't sound like he was, but like, I mean, you and I have both talked about getting ellipticals in these rooms to like do that. So
Yeah, no, I mean, so if you're watching too, it makes sense to me. It just seems difficult to pick up what's happening in a game from listening only to the
sure.
commentary sometimes. That's all.
Into the top 8 of this PPTQ with Jessica Control I got from Spencer13H. Hashtag would be good. That's a lot of top 8s in a row, man. I did the same thing with Jessica. I top 8 a lot of those in a row. Eventually, I have a new updated list. If you want one, it would be good. I'm consider playing it, but like I love Black Green a lot right now, so I don't know what I'll do. Finished 5th, but my teammate won. Playgroup is now 5 qualified deep. Hashtag would be good. That's awesome, except that one of them is Mason. Oh, it's apparently 6. He didn't include Mason. That's way better. That's so much
like
better.
a way better dagger, yeah.
Tough forearm and shoulders cardio workout. Need to work out for Karn wedding.
Need to look
Hashtag-
like no, need
Oh,
to
look
look
like
like
Karn.
Karn.
That's way better. That's actually no. Karn wedding is better. I can't decide. What's better? Arms already Ted as Elspeth. Whoa.
I wonder
yeah.
if hashtag MTG Fitness is real. I'm gonna click on this.
MTG Fitness is real.
Is it
is.
really?
It's a real hashtag people use. The Bachelor is coming to Nashville and Salt Lake City, Utah. Clearly, they have heard the conversation on the cast. Hashtag new sponsor. Hashtag other good. I'm just saying, ABC, if you want to sponsor us, I'm not opposed. Not opposed. Brother Michael cussing in his hashtag. Shakes head. Would that be good? Bring back Brother Michael.
Oh,
is
man.
there no swearing
gonna...
with any sport? I'm sure there is.
I don't know. I mean, I just needed to strongly explain how I felt about Comcast. I mean, I could have used the hashtag frick Comcast, but that, I don't know. That just seemed bad.
Michael, what'd you learn
Like
this
worse
week?
than swearing. Well, I learned that Spencer will actually read anything you tweet under hashtag would that be good. So I got to be real careful in the future.
It's like the teleprompter in
it just happens.
Yeah. Just fargan schlargan. I learned that it feels good to podcast, and it feels really good to podcast when you have a bunch of silver pros podcasting with you. No, I honestly, I did a lot of thinking in Vegas about like my content, my magic, and I just want to understand magic on a different level than I do right now, and I'm really excited to do it. So,
yeah, I mean, the only way to get better is to try, right? Like just to dedicate yourself to it and grind through it like anything else.
Chad also said that we've lost our ABC sponsorship because of Michael's tweet. So, Michael, you can be blamed for that.
Now, I've seen The Bachelor before. I don't think swearing is a problem.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you guys all next week.
Thanks.